back. It's Jan and Joe. It's number 6,372,000 of UnSpun, and we're here to bring you some alternative media. And so we're going to go back to this show to sort of a central point, not the beginning, but a point at least that it can be seen as significant in the whole process of the what can be called the psychedelic movement and the general mind control aspect of that movement. In other words, we're going to go back and look at the Grateful Dead, the good old Grateful Dead. I actually talk a lot about the Grateful Dead. They get brought up quite a bit because of the relationship between the Dead and Kesey, and also the relationship between the Dead and Gordon Mawson.
Well, let's not forget Alan Trist and the Tavistock Institute.
Right? No, we shan't. We will not forget them. I guarantee you. In fact, what I was going to do is just talk about the kind of pre-Grateful Dead period, which basically can be called the Chateau. The Chateau was where Garcia, Robert Hunter, and a guy named Alan Trist, though we don't know for sure if he was actually a resident, though we do know, and I'll go into that in a second, that he was in the group that lived there. He was an attendee of the parties. So they lived at, these individuals who were the core of the Grateful Dead, what became the Grateful Dead, lived at the Chateau, which is at 2100 Santa Cruz Avenue in Menlo Park, I believe. And even though there's some controversy about that, there's some people think it's Palo Alto because evidently the boundaries of the cities may have changed. I don't know. But in any case, the street is still there. And the first thing, from the bird's eye view is that amazingly, about 200 yards away as the bird flies from the Chateau was a house on Perry Lane that was occupied by Ken Kesey. Right. Now, this is quite interesting because Kesey was also, like Robert Hunter, an employee of this project at the Palo Alto VA that purportedly was using these individuals as experiments for this new drug that they were testing called LSD. So one of the things that when people look at the origin of the counterculture that they really don't comment on is that there was this odd relationship between the Grateful Dead and Kesey before the acid tests, before all the LSD giveaways, before the Trips Festival. They had actually known each other since perhaps 1960 on. And with this group, there was another individual, Alan Trist. Now, we know Alan Trist was there, even though if you look at his official biography, it's hard to actually get this data point, but it is correct. On February 20th, 1961, Jerry Garcia was in a car accident, and the individual in the car with him was recorded, and it was Alan Trist. Now, Trist later, years later, became kind of the music producer. I'm not even sure what the title was, quasi-manager. He had some kind of administrative position with the band. But we know because of the car accident that he was actually with the band before they were called the Grateful Dead. In fact, before they were even called the Warlocks, which was the name that the Dead had before they were the Dead. Because they would know in 61 that Jerry and Trist were in this car accident. Now, this is really important because Trist was the son of one of the founders of the Tavistock Institute. And I'm just going to assert as a fact, because we're going to cover a lot of ground, we can't stop and document every little thing, but I'm just going to assert as a fact, and I'll let our listeners and viewers go to Jan's site, Gnostic Media, if they want to actually get documentation on this fact I'm going to give, which is that the Tavistock Institute had a very, very close relationship, exchanged individuals with this project MK Ultra, right? So the Tavistock was and particularly in this case where the son of the founder ends up with the Grateful Dead. All right. So now this is extremely important, very, very important because of the material that Jan will be showing using the brain here. He brought up the Tavistock Institute, and I think you'll see it isn't a long journey into MK Ultra and the CIA. I mean, basically, they overlap so thoroughly that it's just almost preposterous. But in any case, so now the reason I wanted to do this is I want to go through this little list of the Grateful Dead, and I want to first, before I go into the list, I want to actually read a really, really important document that I found on the internet. And it's a document that talks about the Freemason aspect of the Grateful Dead. About, because many people have wondered why does the dead have so much one-eye symbolism? And if you go to Post Flaviana, and I'm sure that Jan has it posted on his site, probably using the brain. At the very first acid test, there is a hand-drawn poster, and that poster has the all-seeing eye of Freemasonry and the two temples of Boas and Joachim. They are literally the entire symbolism surrounding the introduction of the acid test to the public. This was the first poster. It's hand-drawn, and people have contested the provenance of the poster, saying, oh, this couldn't be. It's impossible. This is too blatant. There's no way this would have been the first poster. However, I want to read this document here so people can actually understand what the poster is. So a woman named Carol Brightman interviewed a guy named Hank Harrison. Now, Hank Harrison was the band manager. He was the band manager of the Warlocks, right? So he knew this collection of individuals in 1961, 62, whenever this group is getting together. He became the original sort of manager of the band. He was an overseer, a handler, older, wiser individual. And he was interviewed by Carol Brightman, and she was amazed at this this poster, because it seemed to be so blatant, so absurd, that she was, there it is. My God, Jan is an amazing wizard. When there you see the beginning of really the beginning of the Haight-Ashbury LSD culture. I mean, you have Gordon Wasson, just to digress, you have Gordon Wasson beginning the process where he seeds the ground with the Life magazine article, and they talk about teenage allowances, and he starts explaining why psychedelic or magic mushrooms is a good idea. But this right here, folks, this is really, really important. Can you pass the acid test? Right, and Jan's bringing up, lo and behold, there it is. Notice the three words at the bottom of the little black box: teenage allowances. Isn't that an amazing coincidence? They're just an incredible coincidence, because remember that the project that magazine is describing, the great adventures and discovery of mushrooms that cause strange visions, has been completely documented. We have the primary documentation. We don't have to guess, conjecture, etc. Gordon Wasson's trip was sub-project 58 of MK Ultra. All right, so that was the onset. You have the you have the Gordon Wasson, and then you have that next poster, second visual representation in the process by which the psychedelic trip to cultural oblivion for my generation occurred. Now, Carol Brightman went back and she asked Hank Harrison. She goes, she shows him that poster. She showed him what is called the Warlocks Bab poster. That's the, and this is in the article. This was directly above this verbiage. So there's no ifs, ands, or buts. She asked Hank. She goes, "What about this piece?" She should now, and asked him outright, who was so interested in secret societies or the Mason or the Illuminati that they would have drawn this? Hank replied to me, and I quote, this is her words, in other words, she's quoting from, he goes, Harrison said, "We are all into that stuff. I'm a Mason, and my family are Masons going way back. And Phil Leach is a Mason, and so is Phil's family. I replied, Phil Leach is a Mason? What degree? Hank replied, oh, he never got that far, never had the time, but he is a 3rd degree Master Mason. Right. I went on, does he keep that covered up, or does he care if anyone knows that? Hank replied, no, I don't think so. I thought lots of people knew. I'm proud of being a Mason. I don't hide it. And I don't think Phil does either, but I doubt he actually talks about it to people. It was way in the past. So I asked him more about this, and Hank mentioned, I would go to the Oxford Library and borrow books on the occult, alchemy, the Grail legend, mystery schools, and the dead would read it and eat it up, and I would return them and bring back more for them to read. So that, now the thing is that he says we were all into it, right? We were all into it. This explains why the Eye of Horus was used as a symbol in the beginning of the dead. Now, why this is all important is that we start out with Alan Trist, the victim of the car accident where he was slightly injured. And then we go through the list of people that are associated with the Grateful Dead. Okay, so you have Jerry Garcia. Now, he's actually identified as being into this Freemason thing. So I just say, well, he is suggested by Harrison as being into that stuff. Hank Harrison, the manager, well, you know he is a Mason. Phil Leach, he is a Mason. Now we come to Bob Weir and Mickey Hart. All right, right. So who are these guys?
Well, they're not Masons. They're Bohemian Grove.
They're Bohemian Grove. Oh, wait a second. Gee, this is really strange. Now, Robert Hunter, this other guy, who is he? Well, gee, he's one of the guys that was hired by MK Ultra. You see, this is getting a little strange, isn't it? I mean, all these Masons, Bohemian Grove members, and someone who's hired by MK Ultra. Now you go a little further out. You go to Alexander Shulgin. Right, he's the guy who worked with Stanley Osley or Osley Stanley. I can never, no matter what I do, I cannot get that right. But anyway, whoever that guy was, Osley, he worked with Shulgin. Now, who is Shulgin? Oh, he's a Bohemian Grove member, right? Oh, gee, this is looking really strange. Now Shulgin worked with Osley Stanley. Now, who is Stanley? Now, gee, Stanley is this guy who checked himself into St. Elizabeth Hospital when he's 16 years old. He was there for like almost 2 years. 16 years old, just checks himself into a mental hospital. Now, what was St. Elizabeth's Hospital at this time? Well, it was where MK Ultra was basically doing all of their experiments with drugs, right? So that's a little bit odd, wouldn't you say? Now you go out to the financing and the girlfriends, and you've got Peggy and Billy Hitchcock, Peggy Hitchcock and Billy Hitchcock. Who are they? Well, they're the Mellon family, right? Gee whiz, the Mellon family. Who are the Mellon family? Well, look at the Mellon family in the OSS, and you'll see that the Mellon family basically ran the OSS during in Europe during World War II. You see, so what do we look at when we see this collection of individuals? We see the banking families, the military intelligence. We see the Masons. We see Bohemian Grove, and we see the Tavistock. We don't see anything else. Oh my! Well, that's really weird. Maybe Pigpen was not a Mason, but in any case, I see. What I would just say is that this collection, and I've said this before, Jan, is that this collection is not possible to assemble accidentally. It's impossible. Regardless of, and I will go into the sort of the context of the Grateful Dead in terms of Gordon Wasson's and the MK Ultra project to create LSD. Which would show that the dead are guilty just on their face. But the fact is, and anyone can do this. Any person out there can do a thought experiment and just go, well, gee, do I know anyone in Bohemian Grove? How many Masons do I know? There's supposed to be 1 million of them in the U.S., 2 million, I don't know, but 1 in 100. How many do you actually know? Ever meet anybody from Tavistock? Anyone out there know anyone from Tavistock? How about the Mellon family? lot of our listeners probably
well,
like.
I did go outside Billy Mellon Hitchcock's the Millbrook Mansion back in March, and I took photos from the top of the car. Does that count?
You actually did that? How
I
cool.
did, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so this is a collection that any normal person can simply look at and go, gee, that's not possible to be accidental. There is something there's some animating principle that is bringing all these members of secret societies together. And I just want to reference something that I saw today. I saw a list that Colin Ross, I believe, my memory serves, had put out, but it's a very well researched list. I don't have it right in front of me. I should have gotten it, but I just want to, in this context, bring it up just as an aside. It had all of the institutions that held the original MK Ultra experiments in terms of the, and this is from the documentation. The documentation shows all these hospitals, VA hospitals, St. Elizabeth hospitals, Army Research Facility, the Edgewood facility. And then oddly enough, it also has 4 Scottish Rite Freemasonry institutions that were used for the MK Ultra experiments. Now, isn't that a little bit strange? Because look, when you see this list here, we see the same thing. We see the Masons, we see all these secret societies, and of course, we see MK Ultra. Robert Hunter was one of the employees of it. He had his cover story, which was he was taking drugs. But anyway, so this is the first thing about the dead, is that just who they are makes it transparent that they are an artificial creation and that they were part of the project that Gordon Wasson created or started. Because remember, when you look at Wasson's document, when you look at this primary document in the MK and the Life magazine article, you are not looking at a one-off. This isn't a one-off. This wasn't the only thing that was done to create this project. This seeding of the ground that Gordon Wasson did had to have been followed up. There had to have been other parts of the project. When they began the project, they had, of course, Wasson. But this,
yeah, let me interject something here, Joe, because at the top of that Life magazine article, and I didn't even notice this before, but let me pull it up here. I just noticed it a minute ago. We have Great Adventures 3. Now, have you, I know I haven't, have you ever looked up what the Great Adventures 1 and 2 were?
Nope.
That would be, another lead to follow up on and see what else they've got.
Absolutely. But, the thing is what I noticed is that what they've done is they have the expression Great Adventures above the statement about the discovery of the mushrooms that cause vision.
And then teenage allowances.
Right. So in other words, the entire black box is what's called NLP. It's neuro-linguistic programming. Great Adventures. And the 3, I think that actually just representing exclamation marks. Oh my God, Great Adventures. Mushrooms that cause great visions, teenage allowed to take the drug. And so this is because remember the organization that produced Wasson's trip is studying the subconscious for determining how to control it. So when you see the black box, you're looking right into the face of the CIA's and MK Ultra's attempt to control the minds of America's youth. There isn't any, if you, once you decode or get the primary documents, it all just collapses. There's no way it can, the cover story, this is all accidental, can hold together. So now remembering that Wasson is not a one-off, that this is the beginning of the project, when you come to then the employment of Robert Hunter and Ken Kesey, right, as MK Ultra supposedly test subjects, the fact that 2 individuals that are most responsible for promoting LSD to the public, Kesey obviously through the acid test, Hunter and the Grateful Dead are the other half of the LSD giveaway project, where at the concerts LSD was available. The documentation of that is, the Deadheads can tell you how much LSD there was at the Dead concerts. And of course, Kesey's behavior at the acid test is also well documented. So So right off the bat, you have a logical certainty that Hunter and Kesey were in the continuum of Wasson's project, of the project that Wasson was also part of. Because to argue the reverse would be that, well, the project existed, and by an amazing circumstance, the two people who were the most powerful in the promoting of LSD to the masses just happened to have employment, right? I mean, this is try to get a jury to believe that, you know, this is just an accident. It was a coincidence. I mean, yeah, it was incredible that Kesey got an employment there, but and then also Hunter. I mean, gee whiz, it's shocking, you know. So the thing is that you have this continuum that leads directly from Gordon Wasson into the employment by Hunter and by MK Ultra of Hunter and Kesey, and this can be basically confirmed by the relationship to Alan Trist, because once the Tavistock has been exposed, and at this point, I'm not even sure how much documentation people need, but once it's been exposed as having this connections with the CIA and with MK Ultra, then you are into basically cloud cuckoo land, trying to argue that, well, this is all just an accidental collection of individuals that somehow, maybe, you know, it's like they talk about the LSD having magic. I mean, the LSD had magic, and Trist and Hunter and Kesey were just all together there on at the chateau in this bohemian enclave, and the next thing you know, there was the acid test, and the public was being bombarded with LSD. So you know, this is our history, folks, and it takes a lot of research. You know, the facts we're bringing out, this seems trivial, but believe me, there's a lot of research in back of this to be able to make these facts known to the public. And so we would appreciate promotion by the public of this fact that the Grateful Dead, you know, were part of the MK Ultra project. They are basically a component of mind control, is how I would describe them. They are there to make it seem acceptable and fun and recreational to take drugs. And of course, with their stupid music, you know, you can easily end up a deadhead. Right? Who wants deadheads? You know, the oligarchs want deadheads. They're easy to control. One thing about deadheads, they'll do what you tell them. So this is, you know, this is the history of the Grateful Dead, and it's something that people just need to be aware of. Now, in my archives, about 6 years ago, I went to the MAPS conference, and Carolyn Garcia spoke there, and a whole bunch of other people. What we need to do is, and I was just looking for that and pulling it up here, what we need to do one of these days is go through their presentations at the MAPS conference, and MAPS is Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. But we've got all of these recordings of these people there, and Carolyn Garcia also gave, if I believe it was her, also gave a screen slideshow of her and the Merry Pranksters and Ken Kesey and all of them. So all of this is probably another good area to go into, and you know, and it's critical. It's absolutely critical. Mine it for more information for all of this. Yeah, it's absolutely critical. You know, it's when I was looking into Owsley, I came across that someone had actually done research into St. Elizabeth Hospital, and they actually determined that the OSS, this is before the CIA, right? This is before the CIA. The OSS had tested mescaline and scopolamine. Scopolamine, yeah. Sorry, thank you. I was hoping I could get it right, but I knew there was only 50-50. So scopolamine. There you go. And they claim this was a truth drug experiment. Oh, well, it's scopolamine is much worse than that. Let me just give a brief history on scopolamine so people are aware of how bad it is. It comes from Datura. It's been reported that down in Colombia, burglars will actually give
scopolamine to their victim, and then take the victim to the house, and then the victim will actually load up the truck for the burglars. I mean,
Right.
it creates an extreme level of hypersuggestion, and you have a lot of these ayahuasca, new age shamans that put datura into their ayahuasca brews as well. It's an extremely dangerous suggestogen.
Yeah. Wow. And so anyway, the article that showed me that the OSS had actually worked, and this is documented, that the OSS had worked with mescaline and scopolamine.
Scopolamine, yeah.
Scopolamine, that the author concluded, he said, ultimately, we said the research at St. Elizabeth Hospital laid the groundwork for influencing the drugged out counterculture 60s movement. Now, the author did not connect the dots, but that statement, of course, relating to Owsley, right, is just as clear as a bell. That, yeah, it did lay the groundwork, and the drugged out culture did emerge from St. Elizabeth because the individual who worked with the dead, he helped produce the LSD, had come from this hospital where he would have been learning all of it.
Now, another thing that St. Elizabeth's Hospital, and I had it up on the screen a bit earlier, but another reason why it's famous is that's where Ezra Pound, the famous poet, was locked up, and Ezra Pound was locked up on double agent Ernest Hemingway's orders, which I pulled the letter of Hemingway stating that. I actually read that on an RBN show some months back. Ordering.
I'd love to see that. Yeah, that's fascinating.
I actually have the letter right here on the desktop. Oh my
gosh, could you possibly read it? I'd love to hear that.
Now, this is this is one of the few letters that Princeton would not allow me to photograph, so I had to type the entire thing. So there's the letter, and he's talking about Archie. That's Archibald MacLeish, who is the librarian for the U.S. Library of Congress, and this whole thing goes into if Ezra Pound should be locked up or should be hung, etc. But this is the letter that shows that it was Ernest Hemingway that essentially had Ezra Pound sent to St. Elizabeth's. And then when we look at the hospital here, we see Stanley Owsley there. Now, another interesting name that pops up here is Anthony David Kidman. Now, he's famous because he has a famous daughter named Nicole Kidman, and she was in a famous film called Eyes Wide Shut from Stanley Kubrick, all about the occult and all of this stuff. But her father was one of the MK Ultra doctors.
It's amazing. Yeah, the way that the entertainment world and the world of the CIA just wave back and forth, individuals always connected. It's sort of like the research that Dave McGowan, rest his soul, did, where he showed that you had on the generation prior, you had military intelligence, and then the generation below, you had the Laurel Canyon rock stars. You had Frank Zappa, Jim Morrison, David Crosby, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's, you can see this connection of how the secret society actually operates. The individuals that as lifetime actors come into our world, we don't know who they are. We see Owsley Stanley. We hear his story. We don't check it for facts, and we just think, well, he's a regular person. How could, at that time when he was producing all these supposedly hundreds of thousands of tabs of LSD, anyone do research into it? You see, the public, because there is no investigative journalism to protect it, is obviously a sitting duck. This person comes out and just says, I'm just into freeing mankind. I just think LSD is really good idea. You'll have creative ideas, you know.
We should try to get Roni Gisson-Stanley on the show. That's his widow who lives in, ironically, Woodstock, New York.
And she's not dating Zane Kesey, is she?
Yeah, they would maybe she's dating Peter Lamborn Wilson, one of the creators of NAMBLA and all of that.
They would be quite the couple. Yeah, so so the public, we get, look at like Jim Morrison or the characters in the Grateful Dead. You get Bob Weir or Robert Hunter. They pop up. There they are. They're keep on trucking whatever music they're singing. There's LSD everywhere, and how can the public really vet these individuals? How can the public ever know that they're in the grip of some kind of cultural force that is taking them into a really destructive place? So you can only really do this kind of research in hindsight. Like people have criticized the trial of Ken Kesey because the author we tried and convicted was dead, right? Like he's not alive to defend himself. Like, Jan and I, we murdered him, right?
Well, people,
so we could go after him when he wasn't around.
People did the same thing when I exposed Gordon Wasson's connections with the CIA, as well as Terrence McKenna. How dare you attack Terrence McKenna? He's dead. Right. Respect our religious heroes, etc. Yeah. But these guys are all the intelligence community.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can't do this research, predictively. You have to do it after the fact, and
you have to go where the citations lead at that.
Yeah, that's right. But it's just you have to have the citations to use, and they come about typically long after the individual has lived, or at least after the act has occurred, by definition. And so, we bring out the information, the facts, basically in this regard, in regards to what is or the Grateful Dead, speak for themselves. It is clearly an agency, a group of agents that are part of this project, which began with Gordon Wasson. Or Gordon Wasson was the seminal moment. It goes further back.
Or Aldous Huxley, even with the doors of perception, etc.
Yeah. So anyway, so you have this process. You have this project, which is not a one-off. Wasson isn't just going to have this little moment of neuro-linguistic programming and then the project disappears. It demands that there be future activity that will link to it. And in fact, that this activity has to spread out. There has to be many more manifestations. It's like Tim Leary in he said, well, our undercover agents in Los Angeles did more than Kesey's bus, but they were all part of the same force. And so, here we have, a collection of facts of tracing down the identities of these individuals in this seminal band. And it's something that is part of our cultural heritage, in the same way, we believe in whatever you want to believe about World War I or World War II. These things have influence upon us. And here we have a band that is still animating. It's still having influence. There are still deadheads. There are still people taking risks.
Let me interject something there. It's interesting that you brought up World War I, World War II. One of the people in charge of the World War II Holocaust propaganda, that was C.D. Jackson. C.D. Jackson went to work for Henry Luce at Time Life magazine, and then later C.D. Jackson became the president or CEO of Time Life. And he was basically in charge of the whole, marketing campaign for the Holocaust and in charge of much of U.S. psychological warfare.
It's fascinating. I was unaware of that. And you can see that, basically, what we have as history is structured as mind control. And they want to take us to a particular point, and it's not for good reasons. This is not done because they have, they're trying to free our minds. That's what they say. But in fact, it's exactly the opposite. They want to control them. And so, when you expose something like the Grateful Dead, and when you say, okay, here are the facts, these are the associations, this isn't circumstance. People will say, well, Leash or excuse me, Weir and Hart, they may have been led into the Bohemian Grove long after they were Grateful Dead. They may have been let in because they were Grateful Dead members. Well, that of course is, kind of odd right on its surface, but it doesn't matter, folks. You and I are not in the Bohemian Grove. It doesn't matter what we do. We don't get asked to join. These guys did. It creates a structure of facts. These are Bohemian Grove members. Alexander Shulgin, one of the more famous Bohemian Grove members, he was sitting there helping Osley with the production of the LSD. It's just too many damn secret societies in too few people to be accidental. There is no way this can be circumstance. You're looking at a band that was created basically for the same purpose that Gordon Wasson's storyline was created. Same exact purpose, part of the same process. Wasson has, his part of the op, and years later, these guys come along and they're trying to push basically they're trying to push it now into the conclusion. And the reason why, that people say, well, Robert Hunter and Ken Kesey. Yeah, it's a bizarre circumstance. It is. I mean, who can deny this? It's very, very strange, but it just happened. Just happened. It was accidental, just circumstances.
Well, it's like that whole serendipity thing that Dave McGowan pointed out that I cover in Theogen's What's in a Name and in Spies in Academic Clothing. The whole, and I play that up to some people's annoyance, but I do that because of these constant so-called serendipitous meetings with all of these agents.
Right, exactly, because that's one of the places they're really weak. It's sort of like if you look at Stuart Brand's explanation of how he gets a hold of Kesey. I mean, it's just preposterous. These because the meetings are artificial, and therefore the storylines to explain the meeting have to be invented, and that's an area of weakness, an area that people can actually do research in and actually make some sense out of. And two of them that need, is the Robert Hunter and Ken Kesey working for MK Ultra, because what is really going on there is that they need a cover story to have Hunter and Kesey, be at the acid tests. Kesey is running around acting like a madman, encouraging the use of the drug. Hunter is there, droning on with his bass guitar, whatever, warbling out these, to create the kind of unsettling sound, right? To start, moving people's minds in the bad direction. But what really went on is, people say, well, they were just there accidentally and they took the drug and then they liked the drug. Well, wait a second. When you look at the Gordon Wasson documents, you can see it's not a one-off. There has to be other people, involved in this. All of those individuals will need a cover story. Gordon Wasson had his cover story, right?
Absolutely.
He had his little explanation. I mean, remember Maria Sabina. He didn't meet the fat butcher. He met this Maria. She's a shamaness. This is complete.
A one-eyed butcher, anyway.
Yeah, one-eyed.
Who sweated profusely and smoked cigars.
Right. Right. This guy is not going to launch the psychedelic movement. So they got Maria Sabina. It's just completely fake.
Well, Mary is much more spiritual as a spiritual leader than a sweaty guy, one-eyed sweaty guy with
right. I wouldn't let him give me a hamburger, let alone a magic mushroom. So anyway, so they need a cover story. So this is why you have this nonsense about the experimentation, because this puts them in a position where they will like LSD, right? I mean, how would someone in the early 60s walk around and go, I really like LSD? I mean, there was a little bit of experimentation going on, but the idea that both of these guys would have a background, of a relationship to experimentation with LSD, that's a little bit how can they do that? Well, it's because they were experimented on, right? So this is how they were introduced to LSD, and they both really like LSD, right? They just love LSD. Well, now they have to give it to their friends. They've got to grow the movement a little bit. Well, where's the LSD going to come from, Jan? Well, they've got to steal it. Right. It's just sitting there in the hospital, no problem. And the LSD is all over the place. And they
just pick up a 50-gallon drum or whatever.
Right, and out they go. And now they've got.
That's the exact same story as Terrence McKenna's running off with a drum supposedly of DMT. Let me read a few quotes here that I have on Robert Hunter and Alan Trist in the Brain Database. And this one's from Sweet Chaos, The Grateful Dead's American Adventure by Carol Brightman.
Brightman, yeah.
What united the original Provincetown Bohemians, and the Bohemians is another key word there that should clue people in. Playwrights and painters both was the idea that art was the great universal refreshment. Curiously, for such dissimilar folk, this is what united the founders of the Grateful Dead. What we were interested in was art, recalls Alan Trist, who was 19 when his father, Eric Trist, a visiting fellow at Stanford who founded the Tavistock Institute in London, arrived in Palo Alto in 1960. It was the business of being an artist that totally captured Jerry and Hunter, he states, pointing out to me when we met at a bagel shop near the Dead's office in San Rafael. I mean, if you can just believe this nonsense.
Oh, it just makes me sick to my stomach.
This one's from a long, strange trip inside the history of the Grateful Dead by Dennis McNally. One consequence of American Beauty was the return of Alan Trist, Garcia and Hunter's buddy from Palo Alto. When he'd left California, he attended Cambridge, eventually marrying Robert Hunter's friend from the same Palo Alto circle, Christine Bourne. Through the 60s, Christie maintained a close friendship with both men, which kept the connection alive. After the Hollywood Festival show in 1970, Alan had gotten together with Hunter and McIntyre, and eventually John had offered him the job of running Ice Nine, the Dead's music publishing firm. Alan faced an interesting quandary. He was then working with the Tavistock Institute, which studied social change, and now he had the opportunity to live it.
What a coincidence. I mean,
What a coincidence.
It's just incredible. There he is at the Tavistock, innocently studying how to do mind control in the masses. And he has this long-standing relationship with the members of the Grateful Dead. And then he
it's just a coincidence. It's just serendipity, Joe. Let's not get into any wacky conspiracy theorists, because then you have to show the CIA document from where the term conspiracy theory came from.
Yeah, but so this is
well, let me go. There's actually a couple more here. Jerry Garcia met Robert Hunter, who was a Scientologist and would become a longtime lyrical collaborator with the Grateful Dead. In April 1961, Garcia and Hunter began to participate in the local art and music scenes. Sometimes playing at Kepler's Books, Garcia performed his first concert with Hunter, earning $5. Garcia and Hunter also played in a band called Wildwood Boys with David Nelson, a future contributor to some Grateful Dead albums. And let's see, that's from Garcia, An American Life. And then there's one more here. Around 1962, Hunter was an early volunteer test subject, along with Kesey, like you were just saying, here's this same storyline, for psychedelic chemicals at Stanford University's research, covertly sponsored by the CIA in their MKUltra program. He was paid to take LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline and report on his experiences. And wasn't it Robert Hunter, or was it? It was Robert Hunter, who spent time at Langley and wrote the article in Forbes magazine called Why Spy, or at least the article was written about him. And says, and report on his experiences, which were creatively formative for him. Sit back, picture yourself swooping up a shell of purple with foam crests of crystal drops, soft nigh as they fall into the sea, morning creep very softly mist, and then sort of cascade tinkly bell like, must I take you by the hand ever so slowly type, and then conglomerate suddenly into a peal of silver vibrant, uncomprehendingly, blood singingly, joyously resounding bells. By my faith, if this be insanity, then for the love of God, permit me to remain insane. And that's from Long Strange Trip, again, by Dennis McNally, 4243.
Were those Hunter's words?
Apparently, yes, he's quoting Hunter, and there is a couple citations that McNally...
Yeah, I mean, that's just a really great thing to read to young people, who are trying to find their way in the world. You really, when you do something like that, particularly in the context of drugs, I mean, you were just about as evil a person as you can, even conjure up, and so that's why this guy is still alive. I really, again, we issue invitations to Zane Kesey and to Robert Hunter and to Weir. Come on the show. Let's get it. We can sit here and we'll talk to you about this. We really the public needs to have this stuff vetted. And so it's time we did it, not just talk about it. I know
maybe we should have a congressional hearing for the Grateful Dead and all of these people who are still alive, who were involved in this stuff, and then maybe have them locked up at Guantanamo and
where they belong,
where they belong, and maybe do psychological experiments on them there, like they do.
Well, to find out how they could get so evil. I mean, the thing is, what has to occur, what really needs to get done is there needs to be a real public investigation. And I mean public, I mean where all of the facts are laid on the table. The public can see exactly how the Grateful Dead was created, who these people are, how these secret societies interacted with them, and go back and recreate the steps that all of these things led up to the counterculture, because it is just getting clearer and clearer, right? That from Gordon Wasson to the Grateful Dead is basically a very, very clear-cut path, right? Very clear-cut. You've got MK Ultra employment by the Dead, right, with Robert Hunter. So this isn't conjecture. These are the steps. We know Wasson wasn't a one-off. We know the Grateful Dead is in one individual and locked right into MK Ultra, and then you see the Dead promoting LSD, giving it away, and this is what is the documentation shows that at these shows that LSD is available, like the acid test, right? So that the idea that would be circumstantial, that could be coincidental. I mean, that is literally a 1 in a million kind of thing. And then on the other side of the equation, you have Ken Kesey, right? Now Kesey, he has, the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest that has the ending of the Indian going back and leaving his schizophrenia behind and getting a clear mind, because he's gone back to nature. Kesey then goes into the same experience, so-called, with the Grateful Dead. He gets, he has access to LSD. He steals it. He takes it out. He introduces it to his friends. More and more people become involved with it. And next thing you know, he has the acid test, right? Well, did lightning strike twice? Did incredibly another individual who had this employment contract just have this idea that, well, gee whiz, I'm going to promote LSD to the mass people, of the masses of people. Oh my gosh, I just really want to do this, right? So incredibly, the project.
Well, there was another one who did that, Joe. What was his name? That was you're the one in Greenwich Village who showed up with the mayonnaise jar full of LSD, passing it out to Leary and everybody in Greenwich Village.
I'm trying to think of this guy.
Michael Hollingshead.
Right. I don't have that information right in front of me, but you have here, you've got two guys that basically concluded the project that can be demonstrated through the primary documents to have been started by MK Ultra. Right? You've got Kesey and you've got the Grateful Dead with Robert Hunter. So you have these two different components. They both have employment with MK Ultra. Gordon Wasson's Subproject 58 was an MK Ultra project, right? So there is no way, absent really strong evidence to the contrary, that this simply isn't a organized process. Wasson was lying about his cover story. Hunter and Kesey are lying about theirs. That's part of the project. But the fact that they have employment into this organization cannot be circumstantial. It's not possible. This is the idea of both of them having employment, and then being the two individuals that go out, and Hunter with the Grateful Dead and Kesey with the acid test, that then start promoting LSD. All you have to do, ladies and gentlemen, is just ask yourself a simple thought experiment. You and everyone out there knows someone who's taken LSD. I'm sure of that. It's so common now. Everyone has some, knowledge of someone who's taken it. How many of those people had a spontaneous revelation, an epiphany, where they go, you know what? I'm just going to go out and give away LSD to hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. Right. Well, wait a second.
And spend the millions of dollars to make it.
Right. Well, wait a second. Nobody. Zero. Right? No one knows anyone like that.
It's the same thing as when you look at the Merry Pranksters and all of the people on the bus. Almost every one of them went out and became a famous author and involved in promoting this whole scene. And how many of you out there who went to a dead show? I went to like 8 dead shows back in the day, and I did write a book, and I'm the only one that I know out of my group of friends who did. But how many of you got high on a bus at a dead show, left the dead show, and then all of your friends on that bus that you got high with all went out and wrote a book about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were a lot of people on the bus that didn't write books, but there was way too many. It was like when you have Krasner and Brand and I forget the list, but I actually went through this just the other day, and it was way too many became culturally well. And remember, the dead are pranksters. Basically.
Well, you know, Dorothy Fadiman married James Fadiman. Right. She was Ken Kesey's lover. She went to work for the UN and making documentary films promoting Agenda 21.
Oh, just incredible circumstance.
You got Neil Cassidy, Paul Krasner, Stuart Brand, Tom Wolfe wrote a book. Wavy Gravy, I think.
Paul Foster, Paul Foster is another guy. He was the one who was in the clown outfit at Woodstock. Yeah, he wrote a book. I mean, gee whiz, what a coincidence. I mean, it looked like it was just a group of deadheads on LSD, and the next thing you know, they're out influencing culture like they're basically a pack of oligarch children, Right. So it's not, this isn't circumstance. This is a very, in my opinion, very thinly veiled. The camouflage that the dead and Kesey have around them with these cover stories is very, very weak. And if it becomes something that is public knowledge that these guys are in fact part of the Gordon Wasson op, then this will have
or MK Ultra in general. You mean?
Exactly. I mean, then this will just topple the government. This will topple the government because if the public knows this, right, the public knows that this kind of mind control is being used against them by an organization inside the government, then democracy in the United States will be exposed as a fraud, right?
Absolutely.
It's something that just the oligarchs run as a pageant by creating both sides.
Like Cass Sunstein of the social engineer and author of the book Nudge as Barack Obama's go-to guy for this kind of crap.
Right, and Sunstein said that, we just can't have conspiracy theories because that could really make democracy impossible. Yeah, Cass, it would make it impossible if people know that you're a lying sack and that you're operating, that would definitely make democracy a little bit difficult because then people would go to the ballot box and they'd go, this doesn't make any sense. There's no choices here that aren't controlled by this organization. And you know what? Democracy as you know it, which is to elect your group, then that would fall apart.
Let's, I'm just pulling it up here, but let's go to that quote, the first paragraph from Bernays' book, where he says, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. In other words, manipulating the people to get them to vote the way you want to and to control them the way you want to. It is an important element in so-called democratic or mob-ruled society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. This is the logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. So this is exactly what we're talking about. The deadheads, your Jim Morrisons, all of your guys, how they manipulate and control democracy. It's not about the people ruling. I mean, it's not a republic, it's a mob rule.
Yeah, and so they keep us a mob by not letting us have access to real education that would provide, the logical thinking, which would cut through the sophistry. If we could actually think clear, they wouldn't be quite as easy as to put forward things like the Grateful Dead and the acid test. Maybe people would go, wait a second. I think I want to do a little more research into the background of these people and the background of the drug, which was studied strictly as a psychotic producing element, right? That was supposed to give psychiatrists an insight into schizophrenia.
Oh, well,
right?
But wait, Joe, that was remarketed as spiritual. So it doesn't cause a psychotic episode because that's now the spiritual experience. I mean,
right. It's sort of
you
like
can tell the difference between the two. That's a different issue.
It's like in the MK Ultra reunion party. I forget the guy's name. It may have been Janiger. He's talking to Larry, and he goes, "Yeah, there was a guy that escaped from the LSD experiments, and we found him in a tree,
right outside. Yeah, and he was trying to fly or something like that,
laughing his head off, like, hey, this is really funny. A psychotic break."
I think that was Janiger.
And then Larry, because he sees what's going on, he goes, "Well, we should all be in that tree." Right, Tim. Yeah, that's really a wonderful, spiritually uplifting experience where someone has a psychotic break and then climbs into a tree, basically because they're just so
fly. Right.
They're trying to fly, and this is it. And you're trying to tell us, Tim, that this is what your idea of a spiritually elevated experience is. It's absolute nonsense. It doesn't even rise to the level of sophistry. It was just cultural destruction on a mass scale. So we have to, people who understand this analysis, they need to take this to their politicians, local politicians, because at the higher levels, I'm afraid you're going to be dealing with agents, but get local politicians to start local investigations into this. Because the drug culture is still in existence. It's still damaging children. And if we can expose it for what it is, which is just mind control by the oligarchs, then maybe we'll have a better chance on getting some of these kids to stop using this stuff.
Now, what I want to mention something on your point there, Joe, and what a lot of people don't understand is like they'll say, okay, well, what about Timothy Leary? He was arrested. He went to San Luis Obispo prison. The weathermen helped him escape. He went to Algeria and all of this stuff. What people need to understand, though, is that there is a separation between the federal government and the CIA and your local county and city governments and local sheriff's department and police departments, et cetera. So what you have is the CIA and Leary and Kesey and Wasson and Aldous Huxley, et cetera, out there promoting the drugs at the higher level for the CIA and the MI6. And then you have in general, the good ones anyway, the local cops, the local sheriffs and deputies trying to clean up this mess. And so, if an agent gets busted, they have to have a cover story. So, well, Leary's going to have to spend a few weeks or months in prison to go with the story. And this is why Leary did the whole prison escape book, Confessions of a Hope Fiend, or Dope. Now I'm forgetting which one, based off of Crowley's book.
I can't remember.
This is the whole cover story. And Leary even admitted trying to sell the film rights to his escape before he ever escaped. And that's in the recent show that we did on the reunion party that people can find on the Gnostic Media website. But there is this separation between federal and local government. The local government tries to clean it up, and the federal government is out there dumping all the drugs and trying to destroy the youth, et cetera. So what we need to do is figure out a way to inform the local branches of government who aren't corrupt in how, in this information so that they can then, go out and target these federal agents, right?
Absolutely. That is, Jan, that is just a great point. Absolutely a great point. Because, when you were talking, I realized, and when the local enforcement agencies have the awareness of this, have the awareness of the federal government's malfeasance, then they're going to be a lot less likely to follow the orders of the federal government if it comes to martial law or some situation like that.
Absolutely.
They'll have an understanding that one of the things they have to protect the American people against is this organization that controls the CIA, right?
And the CIA themselves.
and the CIA and the so-called political class, which is basically just bought and sold by the organization. So if the local enforcement agencies know this, then they'll be a lot more alert and know how to protect the citizens against this kinds of these sorts of agents.
Right. All right. So everyone, please support the show. Gnosticmedia.com. There's a donate button at the top. Joe Atwill over there. And that's postlevion.org.
We got a donate button too. Jan, thanks so much.
And support the network. CCN. Thanks so much, Joe. See you guys. Are you going to be around next week, Joe?
I am.
All right. See you then. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for tuning into CCN. This unique network is dedicated to free and independent media. CCN was created with the belief that information is the common heritage of all beings, which is why our live stream high-definition broadcast is easily accessible and free to view. If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Having produced over 1,000 shows in 2015, which are all archived on YouTube, we look forward to bringing you more groundbreaking, cutting-edge information in 2016. For more information on what is on, please check out our broadcast guide for weekly updates. CCN broadcasts in multiple languages and features some key voices of our challenging times who are all in pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world. CCN belongs to you, the people, and it is up to you all to keep this network on the air. Please contribute to the Network Support Fund or visit the CCN shop. We thank you all for supporting free and independent media.